Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. Today's episode is a little bit different to a normal episode. Usually I'll be sitting down and chatting to someone, hearing about all the things that they've achieved. In today's episode, we're going to do something different. When I first started recording episodes for the podcast, I got in touch with 3 of my friends and we recorded an episode about their careers and about the things that they were doing. These guys are Cooper, Oscar, and Alex, and we'll hear more about them later. I've split up this podcast into 3 different sections where I've taken the best bits out of these interviews and put them into one podcast episode. The best way to navigate this is going to be by the timestamps in the description. So not all of this is going to resonate with you, and that's fine. But if you want to skip to certain parts, you can do that in the description of this episode. The first part of this podcast is with my friend Cooper. So Cooper is a grad at Macquarie. He's also from Adelaide. All of my friends in this episode are from Adelaide. And Cooper moved from Adelaide to Sydney to start working at Macquarie. And one of the things I wanted to talk to him about was his move and how he actually dealt with working interstate. And I think it's something that is quite important because now in today's day and age, a lot of us are moving around, moving to different states, doing all these different things. And I thought it was great to get his perspective on his move interstate and, what he learned from that, how he dealt with that. Would he recommend that to someone else? That's the first part. The second part is with my friend Oscar. And Oscar is a grad. He's also now moved to Sydney and he works at Atlassian. And one of the things I really wanted to talk to Oscar about was about the software engineering interview and his interviewing process, how he prepared for that and how he sort of went about doing it. Atlassian's quite a competitive place to get into, to work, especially as a grad. And the software engineering interview is kind of this unique process that takes a lot of preparation and it takes a lot of effort to land a job at some of these kinds of companies. It's very unique. And so I got Oscar's thoughts on, how he went about doing that and what he'd recommend if someone was going to go and do that again. The third part of this episode is with my friend Alex, and he is still in Adelaide, and he graduated from university and now works at Deloitte. And Alex had a lot of advice. He was the president at 180 Degrees Consulting, which is a non-profit kind of consulting club that's associated with the university. So it's based all around Australia and all around the world. And what happens is uni students will come and join 180 Degrees Consulting, and then they'll set them up to work with a non-profit and kind of do a consulting project with different non-profit organizations. And Alex was the president of this club in Adelaide, and he had some great advice about being a good consultant, what it takes to be, a good consultant and have a good career. So I've combined all of these together. If you don't want to listen to all of these, please skip around, find the bits that you like. The timestamps for the 3 main sections are in the description. So you can skip around to wherever you'd like. Without further ado, please enjoy. So this part of the interview is with Cooper. And as I mentioned, Cooper has moved from Adelaide to Sydney to start work. And he's a fascinating guy. And in this part of the podcast today, we're going to talk about this move from Adelaide to Sydney and, kind of what was his experience moving interstate for work. Please enjoy. I want to talk about your decision to apply for roles so obviously you're from Adelaide, you've moved to Sydney to work at Macquarie. What were your thoughts behind that? Being open to moving to state, is that something you were always keen on, or did you kind of see that, how did you go about thinking about that?
Yeah, good question. I think I wouldn't say I was always keen on moving interstate for work, but it was probably more something I noticed when I was applying for internship roles that there weren't too many that I was interested in Adelaide or graduate programs or just full-time work in Adelaide. Especially in the financial industry, there isn't a very big presence there. So I think it was probably more out of necessity looking interstate into either Sydney or Melbourne, particularly in Australia. So yeah, pre-COVID, I think I definitely had big plans to try to work in a lot of different places and gain experience, living in different countries. I think work in like New York or London would be absolutely sick. And it's definitely something I want to try and do one day. But yeah, it's sort of a different environment at the moment, particularly with the 3-month lockdown that we've been in.
Yeah.
But I think, I wouldn't say that it wasn't something I always wanted to do, but I think it just sort of happened to turn out that way.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think that was my experience too. Was a lot of the if I got like my top 10 places I wanted to work, like none of them were in Adelaide. Almost like even I'm trying to think back of the place I did end up applying for. I mean, I think barring like some of the consulting companies, like the big four, like I think almost every other place I applied was Interstate, because that's
that's just my
where
experience as well.
Yeah. And that's just, like you said, that's just what we have to do. And I think for me as well, I had the experience like internationally, like studying during the university. So I was like, I felt more confident doing that. Like, what were your thoughts on, like, were you nervous at all going into state for work? It's obviously quite a big move to like sort of move out of home, move into state and start a new job, like all at the same time. How, what was your experience like?
Yeah, it's definitely a nervous time. It's quite difficult as well. But I think, when I first moved over, which was February of this year, I think it was really good moving over and then starting a grad program, because there's a lot of people who are in the same field as you, who had the same experience, who don't know anyone over here. So it was really good to have those people who understand like what you're going through at the moment, and then be able to chat and connect with them. But it's also really exciting because, I mean, Sydney is definitely a different vibe to Adelaide. A lot of the other grads at work, think that I come from some country town in the outback of Australia. So yeah, it's definitely it's definitely challenging. I mean, I won't lie about that, especially during a period of lockdown like this. But I think, trying to remember back to when I first started, it was really exciting. But yeah, I think it definitely helps if you have people who are going through the same experience as you. So I think that's definitely a benefit of joining a grad program.
Yeah, for sure. And now that you've been, you've kind of been there for a bit over 6 months now, is moving into state for work something that you recommend to someone that's still at university?
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously it depends on personal circumstances and all of that. But I mean, it was something that I think I've definitely grown out of this experience. I've learned to be more independent, which I haven't really had a choice in that, because I mean, I live alone here and didn't really know anyone outside of work. So it's definitely forced me to become more independent and grow as a person, I think. But I definitely recommend it. But you just understand that when you do it, they're going to be hard times, and you're going to have to sacrifice something. I would definitely recommend doing it. Yeah,
that's great. And one thing I asked you before coming on here today was for your favorite quote. I'm very keen to hear what yours is.
Yeah, so I remember this goes back to when I was living in my family home. We had a Michael Jordan poster in my shed, and it had a picture of like Michael Jordan taking shots, and it said, you miss 100% on 100% of the shots you never take. And when I was a kid, I remember looking at that, and it just didn't make any sense to me at all. So I was just thinking, okay, but just shoot it then, because it's not very intuitive, I think. So I remember I asked my dad about it and what it means, and when he explained it to me, I saw that it's much more than just you're not going to miss it. It's more like, if you don't give yourself the opportunity to succeed, then you're destined to fail, I guess. So I think that's something that's definitely stuck with me. I mean, it's because it applies in a lot of different scenarios as well, and it's definitely something that I considered when I was deciding whether or not to move over to Sydney and move into state for work. But then I realised if I didn't do it, then I would always question what if, and we never know whether or not I could have succeeded. So yeah.
It was really great hearing Cooper's experience moving into state. It was definitely something that aligned with my experience as well. I was similar to Cooper in that I was moving out of home, starting work, and moving into state all at the same time. And it's something that is certainly quite daunting and can be tricky, especially considering the past 2 years where we've been living through the pandemic and having lockdowns and all this kind of stuff. So I think I would echo what Cooper said in that it's certainly a character building experience, and it's something that I really enjoyed, and it's something that I'm glad that I did, and I know Cooper is too. And I think that was a great way to summarize his thoughts at the end of that, where is it something that you're going to look back on and regret. So I think moving into state for work, I mean, nowadays we're kind of in this period where it's easier to travel around, but it's also you don't need to as much because of the ability to work remotely and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see where we go in the future. But my lesson, I guess, and my experience would be that, you know, don't hold yourself back from looking at opportunities that aren't where you currently are, because I think, you know, going out and doing those things and getting the full experience of what's out there is really great and a really good opportunity when you're a young person and when you have that ability to move. I think it's something that well worth taking advantage of. So the next part of the podcast today is with my friend Oscar. And as I mentioned, Oscar is a software engineer at Atlassian. And in this part of the podcast, we dive into his experience of his interview process and then also what he would recommend for someone studying or preparing for this software engineering interview. And just to give a bit of background, so the software engineering interviews are at the moment almost quite standard across a lot of the companies, in that what they'll kind of get you to do is these very standard type of software or programming related questions, and the amount of preparation that goes into these is quite significant. So if you go and if you're not familiar with this space, there's lots and lots of content available to study for these things. There's countless websites and books all built just to prepare for this exact interview. But as we go on and talk about it, you know, there is this sort of more hard skills programming type of question that you can get, and then we also touch on the soft skills and kind of the things that Oscar talks about, you know, getting asked and his preparation tips for when he interviewed at Atlassian. So I think this is really fantastic, and it's a great insight into kind of what it takes to go through the interview process at this kind of company and just see, you know, what's actually involved. So I thought this is really, really interesting, and I'm hoping you guys too. We'll see you at the end. I hope you enjoy. I mean, so like applying for internships again at the end of your third year, was there anything you did to prepare for those? Or like what was your experience like in that year?
Yeah, so I'll say first that I interviewed for Atlassian at the end of second year before I got that internship. I got to the final round even, but didn't get an offer, partly because I was a little bit underprepared, and also I had to like present a project, which they don't have in the interview process anymore, but I had to basically present a project after 2 years of being at uni. Like I didn't have much to present that was like aside from uni projects, but they were all pretty small. So at that point I didn't have enough experience really, or like a large enough project that was sufficient enough to show that I was worth hiring.
Yeah.
So when they rejected me, I totally understood. I was like, yeah, fair enough. And the interviewers like gave good feedback, and I was like, yeah, okay, you saw through it.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel bad at all. And so I took this other internship, got a whole bunch of experience, did my 8 hours a week roughly on a project. So I was rejected the first time. I applied again now for a grad role as opposed to an internship role. And I guess I sort of knew the process now. Yeah. And so it was, at least I knew what to prepare for. Not that they spring it on you. Like, rarely will people just be like, they'll usually give you a bit of guidance on what to prepare, unless it's just like quiz questions or like coding questions. If it's something more than that, they'll let you know. And that's where you need to do as much as you can. For me, like my uni tanked so hard while I was preparing. I was doing like so many coding questions, and like I prepared a PowerPoint for my project presentation thing, pasted all these snippets of code and like some diagrams and stuff, and like prepared all this stuff. Could have been over. They didn't require that, but I was like, I'm not letting this opportunity go again. I'm lucky enough to like have already gotten to the final stage, so I've already experienced that interview before. so I can prepare.
Mm.
Obviously, all the questions were different, so it's not like I was cheating. But
Yeah.
you just kind of you do everything you can.
Yeah, for sure. That's
to make
really
sure that
interesting.
you're as well prepared.
Yeah, that's so cool. So when you were like the software engineering like interviews are like they're like massively like well studied. There's countless like questions and websites and everything that you could possibly want to prepare for these. So what was your kind of strategy for preparing for these?
I think everyone thinks of interviewing as like Google interviewing. And obviously they have to have the hardest interviews because they have the most people applying. Like, they want to take the best people they can, and so that's why they are so hard. And also they just look for really smart people. And I was not that smart. So I don't even think I ever got an offer, like even a first interview from Google.
Yeah.
Even when I applied after my internship. So yeah, that's pretty tricky. But in terms of prep, it's probably best to know who you're applying for and what kind of interviews they have. You can usually find either like a alumni who's at that company. You can probably find them on LinkedIn or something, and just like reach out to them and be like, hey, can you give me like a debrief on what the interview process is? And so you can kind of get a little bit ahead of, you kind of give yourself a bit more time to prepare, as opposed to like sending in your resume, not knowing anything, getting the first interview, and like that's immediately when all your prep starts because you don't know anything before then.
Yeah.
And then like you may be done interviewing in 2 weeks. But if you can go and find someone and just have a chat with them, most people like to talk about their work. So I'm sure you'll be able to find someone that's happy to chat, and they can just tell you like, oh, you'll have this kind of interview up first. You may have like a behavioral interview second on like a phone call, and then you'll have a whiteboarding interview and this other kind of interview. And so they can kind of just let you know what is coming, what to prepare for. And yeah, you can totally like read all the books. There's lots of books and articles that will probably explain it better than me.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of, I guess, like the coding side of things, just do some like leak code questions on HackerRank or TopCode or all the other different ones out there. Just get some practice in for that sort of stuff. You can never be too prepared.
Yeah.
And then also for like, you'll get hit with behavioral stuff, which is very much like, that one I think is harder than the coding one. The coding one, you either have it or you don't. Like, unless you have a bad day, but you hope not. But like, they'll either give you a question that you don't really know how to solve, or you do.
Yeah.
But with the behavioral stuff, it's very like, you can always answer a question. Like, it could be a shit answer, but you can always give an answer.
Yeah.
But that's where you've got to learn, like, I think there's a thing called STAR or whatever, where it's like you give the situation and then like who the people were, what you did, and like the outcome of it. And it's like this kind of structure to your answers that the interviewers are all looking for as well, because the interviewers are trained in STAR. I think it's STAR. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. I can't remember what the letters mean, but that's...
Yeah, neither. Right. But yeah, I think it's STAR, and it's just like the interviewers know about it, and if you know about it, it's like super fluent. So that's one thing I would recommend. And just trying to premeditate a range of scenarios and a range of experiences, because if you keep coming back to like the same group project, it doesn't look so good. I'd say that interviewers are smart and they've done hundreds, right? So they kind of know every answer in the book, just about, and like every uni group project dynamic there is. And so there's no reason to blow things up bigger than they are. Often you do that, like in your resume, you'll be like, I did all these great things and then you did all these cool things. But it's like, what do you really achieve? Like, that's what they want to know. Like, what was the outcome? Which a lot of people miss. A lot of people miss, like, how'd it go? That's often like the follow-up question you get from an interview. It's like, you're like, oh, we did this project and like there was a bit of conflict, but we managed to resolve it and we made this decision. And they're like, okay, like, how'd it turn out? And you're like, oh, yeah, it was all right.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to turn out well, but you have
Yeah.
to have at least shown that you evaluated the outcome, because that's what you learn from. And they want to see that in this scenario, you may have made the wrong decision, but you acknowledge the outcome and how you could do it better next time. And that's the like real behavioral learning that they want to see.
So I want to dive in a little bit more into HackerRank or LeetCode or whatever you chose to use. Did you have like a kind of curriculum that you'd set up, or was it very structured, or did you just kind of go in there and just try and just do as many as possible?
In terms of, well, I was lucky because one of the courses I did, as part of it, you had to do like we used Topcoder in that course, but it's like the same as all the others. We had to do 3 problems per week, it may have been, or per fortnight or something. I think it was per week though. And they gave you like a set of 5 to choose from or whatever, and they had like the difficulty. So I ended up doing across like 12 weeks or 10 weeks, like 30 questions or more. And I also picked the harder ones because like I wanted more value from them.
Yeah.
And so I kind of had, after finishing this course, like a fairly strong foundation of some popular algorithms, or at least like exposure to them. You don't have to like memorize them until you get to the interview, of course, but at least know of them. Like shortest distance sort of algorithms and stuff like that. And so I had that exposure, but I guess if I hadn't, you could still like plan the different data structures you want to learn. So like maps, sets, just working with strings in general and arrays. Like sometimes you want to do fancy stuff with strings, and then graphs, which are graphs and trees. And so you can kind of like pick the different bits you want to work on, and then usually, at least I know HackerRank does, will like categorize problems that require a certain type of data structure. So at least it's not a mystery what you should use, but it's like getting you some experience in developing a solution with that data structure. And the same applies to algorithms. You'll need some different algorithms to solve certain problems, like dynamic programming and other stuff like that. And so you can generally like pick out the things you want to learn, and then on whatever website it is, find the category for that and like work your way through some problems.
Yeah.
That's about it.
For sure. Cool. What are, like, you've done a few of these, you've probably, some of your colleagues at work have done the similar process to you. What are some mistakes that you think like are fairly common at this stage, when we're going through like this interview process, that you think, whether that be the technical part that we've just spoken about or the actual behavioral part, what are some big mistakes that you think people commonly make, and how would you go about, fixing those?
I guess for the coding ones, it depends on the company. They look for certain things. In my opinion, they're like, if you're interviewing someone writing code, you don't just want to see the answer, because that doesn't tell you a whole lot about the person and how they're going to work in a team, and at least how they're going to work under, like within a group, and like you're given requirements and tasks and so on. And also, just getting the answer is not good enough in real life. Like, just because it works doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. And so it's important to see, even if they get the perfect answer, sometimes you're like, do you really know what you're doing? Like, so there's a few aspects to like how you code that should matter. Maybe it's best to ask the interviewer beforehand, like, hey, do you care about variable names? And if they're like, nah, it doesn't matter, I don't care, then use whatever names you want. But if they do, use normal variable names, like use meaningful ones. Like, it frustrates me when I see people using like A and B. And it's just like, what is that? You know what it is when it's only like 100 lines.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with like a big code base, it means nothing. Yeah. And an interviewer might see that and just like take a small note and be like, okay, doesn't really care about variable names. Yeah. They may ask you and be like, can you give some better names? And then you go and give some better names. But like, it takes no time, and it helps yourself because you can go look back and be like, oh, that's what it's doing. It helps the interviewer understand your code as you write it. And it's just a good practice in general. Variable names, number one. Also, I think, these all really depend on the format of the interview. So maybe it's best to just ask, or like the interviewer might tell you, but if it's rapid fire questions, or like they plan on asking you multiple coding questions, across however long the interview is, then maybe speed is important. But if it's maybe one, or it's a question that kind of has extensions to it, and they will just keep adding on more and more over time, then it's worthwhile when you get the question just kind of thinking for a moment. Like, don't dive into the code. Just have a think about what your solution might be broadly, what data structures you're going to use, what kind of performance it will have. Those sorts of things, impressive to interviewers to see that you can have that foresight into what solutions are good, and also evaluate different ones. I think that's another thing that people don't do nearly enough of, is they have a solution in mind and they just dive into it, and you don't know if they ever thought of anything else. They could have just gotten lucky and picked that the first time. They could have evaluated like 3 different options, didn't say a thing, and then just picked one. So talk about it and be like, I could do it this way and use this, but I know that that's really inefficient. I could do it this way, but maybe it won't work. I could do it this way, and I think this is the best option to go with. Like, show your decision making, because again, decision making is a really valuable skill as a developer, not just like, oh, I got it to work.
So it was great to hear from Oscar about those different experiences that he's had in a programming interview. I thought it was really interesting the amount of effort that he put into preparing for that coding part of the question. He was saying that his university grades went way down, basically, when he was preparing for that interview, which is really interesting to see, how much effort he put into it. And I think it's a great example of really what it can take to get a job in these kinds of companies and preparing for these kinds of interviews. And I thought it was interesting too, his focus on the softer skills as well. And it's something that probably typically programming types aren't as good at as that kind of thing. And it was interesting, his focus on that area and how important that also is compared to the more hard skills in programming and things like that. So yeah, I thought that was really fantastic. The next part of this podcast today is with Alex, and Alex is a friend of mine also from Adelaide, as I mentioned. He was the president of 180 Degrees Consulting. So, as I mentioned right at the start of the podcast, 180 Degrees Consulting is this place where uni students can come together and do sort of pro bono consulting for charities and small companies, and it's a great way to get exposure to consulting while you're a student, and also to sort of kind of give back to the community. It's a win-win for both yourself and for the charities and for the places that you're helping out. So I had a great experience there, and that's one of the areas that I got to know Alex a bit better. And his experience there, he was involved for many years, and I believe he's still involved today. He met so many people through that and really found out what it took to be a good consultant. And he's now a graduate at Deloitte in Adelaide. So I sat him down, and we were really speaking about what are the attributes and what are the characteristics that he thinks are important in a consultant, and how can you go about developing those, and what traits kind of set you up well for success. So this is another great conversation, and I hope you enjoy. And for the viewers who don't know what 180 actually is, could you give us a bit of an insight into what they do and how it all works?
Yeah, absolutely. So 180 Degrees Consulting is a student-led volunteer consulting organisation. So it's global, and it's run through universities, and it's pretty much just getting some of the top talent. So I think our branch had probably about 20% acceptance rate and stuff like that, and then only about 25% of the branches who applied to start actually get through. So it's trying to get that university talent who really want to get some experience and hands-on experience working with clients, and then marry that up by helping not-for-profits who just need some really cheap or pro bono consulting advice to sort of become more efficient and effective with what they do. So, just get students who want a bit of experience and get them to help charities and build a bit of social impact leadership within students as well, so that when they go into the workforce, they are a bit more conscious of having a community impact rather than just getting to a job and working.
One thing I really want to ask you about is like the amount of graduates that you've seen through your involvement with the university and with 180. What are some key things or key traits even that you've seen in people that end up succeeding in that kind of environment versus the people that kind of, they kind of stumble, or you can see that they're not really cut out for it in a way that you'd like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it depends on what the definition of success is. I mean, I had a bit of a quick look beforehand, and Google defines it as the accomplishment of an aim or purpose, and Cambridge as the achievement of desired results. And they're pretty broad definitions, whereas we typically think of success as like wealth. There's a definite financial component. There's the social economic status where you're, the classic partner at a big four firm sort of thing. But it really depends on what each person defines as their own personal success and what that aim or desired result is for that person. And that is probably the main thing that would make someone fall into a typically good or typically bad category for that.
Yeah.
As a consultant, is because what they think is success won't be to be a very good consultant. It might be that they're spending more time with their family or that they've got better grades. So that really is what will be the difference between a good consultant at 180 and someone who won't be as much of a high performer, is just because their focus isn't on that task. The focus was on something else. And that's the only reason I ever saw people either leave or feel like they weren't going to be doing well, or sometimes the poor performance as well. It's just that they weren't applying themselves to 180 as much as they were to something else. And it's not necessarily, and they definitely weren't bad. They were very good at what they did. They just didn't have that time spare to apply to 180. And that's just sort of the challenge of graduates, is to spend your time and make that decision with the best available information as to where you want to spend your time. Because I think there's something called like Parkinson's law, where it's like work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Yeah. So if you're giving yourself 1 week to do an assignment, you'll take a week to do an assignment. And if you're giving yourself 1 hour to do 180, then you'll only, you might be really good with that hour, you might be really bad with that hour. So yeah, but some of the typical sort of traits that I find with people who were good and did apply themselves was obviously, they applied themselves, and they both wanted to and did try to actively tried to learn new things. So they weren't sort of stagnating. They were constantly asking questions and asking for that feedback about how can they do better? What are some tools they can use to perform better? Is there anything they can research and look at in their spare time to help be better at 180 and be a better consultant? And that's when we can sort of steer them to certain organisation YouTube channels and stuff. They work well with other people, regardless of whether or not they're similar or not. So it might be the typical challenge of a law student and a business student, where they've just got different ways of thinking. They're not really going to work together. Or an art student against an engineering student, where they're both almost polar opposites in terms of hard skill and soft skill sort of work. So working well with other people, regardless of their background, is really important, and that sort of set people apart as well. Because if you can't work well as a team, then it's sort of difficult to progress up in a leadership team, with the team being the operative word. Because especially in the club management, everyone's just sort of doing it in their spare time, so you need to work with each other to manage it. You can't do it all by yourself. So as the president, I was very lucky to have a good team behind me as well to help that leadership of the branch as a whole. But everyone had their own different job, and it was sort of just, my job was to enable them to be able to be better at their job, rather than me trying to do everything myself as a maniac.
Yeah.
And then there's always the classic, be professional, dress appropriately within your own style. So what we're seeing is a lot of organisations just removing dress code policy. Deloitte's even gone as far as to remove working hours, so you can work, as long as your work's done within the week and you're not leaving your team with too much other stuff to do, then you can work whatever hours you want. So some people start at 6 and finish at 3, so they have more time after school with their kids. And some people start later because they're just not really functioning in the morning, so they might start at 10 and finish a bit later in the evening, because that just works for them. Yeah, it's just be well presented within your personal style. And there is a sort of line that needs to be followed as well within consulting, and just don't rock up in a t-shirt unless you've got a client that only wears t-shirts, sort of thing. And then again, just last thing is just they like working with clients and like solving problems, which sort of goes to do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. So which is a bit trite, but I think
you've done all these amazing things through your whole time. What is one piece of advice that you'd give someone starting university, let's say at the start of next year?
Well, I think because you've spent 5 years at uni as well, because I've done about 5 years at uni as well, and you did too.
Yeah, I did 5,
Yeah, so I think that's probably one of the things I've learned more than anything, is that, a career, your whole lifetime of career is about 40, 50, 60 years of work And that's some little thing that often gets left out when you're doing the success talk is there's a lot of pressure to succeed at a very early age. So it's sort of, if you're, I'm 24 now and I'm just starting as a graduate, only been there for 3 months, and I still feel like I'm relatively young in the whole career side of stuff. I've still got so much to learn, but there's a lot of pressure to succeed. The typical definition of social status and wealth and stuff at an early age. So the piece of advice would be really just to take your time. There's absolutely no rush. If you're still getting into a decent job or getting into the workplace that you want to work at, or the organisation or the job that you want to work in before you're 30, I think that's still a really good achievement. Some people might not actually ever get into the job they like. So it's just take the time, learn some skills, and just be easy on yourself, because you've got 40, 50 years to work, so you might as well enjoy your 20s while you can.
Thank you for listening to episode 13 of Graduate Theory. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks so much for making it this far. Some great lessons there to finish off the episode today. I hope you enjoyed this one. It was a little bit of a different format. Next week we'll be back to the normal format with another interview. Thanks so much for listening this far. I hope you got some value out of however much or however little of the episode that you chose to listen to. If you'd like to stay in touch with Graduate Theory a bit more, if you want to get episodes straight to your inbox, please consider subscribing to the newsletter. In the newsletter, you'll get the episode, and you'll also get my takeaways from the episode as well. So thanks so much for listening this far, and I look forward to seeing you next week.